For my young at heart friends, welcome. Here's Courageous Space. Don't you feel it? I'm sure you can feel it. I feel it every time I wake up. I'm courageous. I'm going to face the day. I'm going to eat my oatmeal. I'm going to make my eggs. For my omnivores, I'm going to have my ham. I'm going to eat the things to get my day started to make sure that I show up fully. Courageousness is not just always happening when we wake up. And I understand that too. I want to offer you this wonderful book, though, to approach courageous space. It's called Where the Wild Things Are. You've probably heard the story. You've probably shared it with some of your youngsters. You've probably shared it with your grandchildren. And at the same time, you probably remember it for your own upbringing. Where the Wild Things Are is actually written by, and the pictures are done by, Maurice Sadak. But I'm not going to be able to read all of this. It would consume too much time. So I want to offer you a little bit of a quick reflection. But there is a young man by the name of Max, and Max is actually in one of his favorite outfits. He's wearing a wolf outfit, and he is being very mischievous, as he always is. What happens, though, is every time Max puts on this outfit, he doesn't know how to behave. Once again, he's mischievous. And so he goes chasing after things and causing a little chaos and disruption. And really, it's all good fun. This one instance that we deal with in the story is that Max actually is told to go to his room because Max was being what his mother calls a wild thing. And he responds to his mother after she calls him a wild thing and says, "I'll eat you up. I'll eat you up." Of course, that got him in trouble. So guess what? He was sent upstairs without eating anything. Well, this wild thing, Max, is brewing up some ideas and begins to change and transform that room into a forest where he all of a sudden has to take a trip where a boat picks him up and takes him to where the wild things are. The wild things are. He'd been traveling for quite some time, for weeks. The book says for years. The interesting thing about this is that when he arrives on shore, other wild things greet him. I love this part of the text. It says, "They roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth. They rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws." Max said, "Be still," and tame them with a magic trick. All of the staring into their yellow eyes without blinking, they were frightened. And they called him the most wild thing of all. They even made him king. He's got a little crown on his head. He's sitting all pish posh. He's owning this moment because all of the wild things are in subjection to him. Now, Max, of course, has these wild things under subjection to him to the point where they are moving and dancing to the moon. They are hanging from trees. They are making noise. They are on each other's back. Max has them completely in his control. Max is having so much fun with all of these wild things, making them do all the things that Max wants them to do, that he then tells them to stop. And he sends the wild things off to bed without eating. And all the while sitting there, he honestly wants to leave because he is so far away and he wants someone to love him. The story goes on a bit more. He gets back home safely. He goes back to the room and he goes to eat. I invite you to pick it up at some point, maybe read it a little bit further. I want to spend time with you and Courageous Space because here, Max is a wild thing with other creatures. He meets these creatures and then subjects his wildness onto them, which is funny. They only actually are wild but they're tamed and wild. I want to step back and let's sit with this story for a moment and reflect on ourselves. Do you remember when you possibly fell in love or loved something so much that no one else understood why you loved it? And everybody thought it was strange, different, or they would say, I won't do that if I were you. That's not the way you should do it. You become a wild thing. Do you remember the moment that you probably put on that outfit that you were questioning multiple times when you woke up and you were like, I don't know if this really looks good on me, and if I go to work or if I go to this school, if I go to this place, I don't know if it's gonna fit. You remember that haircut that you've been daring to try, but you really just cut it a little bit more shorter, not too, just a little bit shorter, but you really want to go for the bold cut, that wild thing. That's the wild thing. Maybe it's the wild thing that goes a little bit beyond our own personal experience to the thing of to dare to have policies where everyone has universal health care. Oh, that's wild for some. Maybe it's too wild to think. New York, a judge just finally granted a polyamorous couple the same rights as a monogamous couple in maintaining property. That's wild. It's so wild. Is it wild to take care of the earth and focus our attention on ecological justice? It's so wild for you to take a break and not get paid and do things voluntarily. It's wild because nobody else does it that way. You become a wild thing to the eye that does not know how to nurture you. If we remember our friend Max, Max is actually wild and sent upstairs without eating. Sometimes we're really wild because we are unnourished. Sometimes we are wild because we've been sent away without care. Sometimes we seem wild because no one has taken the opportunity to really meet us with compassion, kindness, and an ethical, right relationship that says, I see you. Our dear friend Max knew of this experience, and that is why when he met his other wild things, he did them quite the same way. Some of us have done that with our own rearing of children. We spend time trying to make sure that we don't do what our parents did to us or what that guardian did to us. We spend time sometimes in our professions making sure that we are not the teachers that we had when we were in school. I remember not wanting to be the teacher like some of the other teachers I had. But in some way, I was tainted because I, in those experiences, also allowed for me to feel unseen. They were bestowed on me in some kind of way. I know in my seminary days, we would say, you're taking the master's tools, right, to deconstruct the house. And this is what Max is doing. And some of us need to be mindful of how the wild thing about us is tainted and how we treat others who show up in their most wild way. I wonder, what would it have looked like if Max had eaten? I wonder what it would look like if we took care of ourselves in the morning, maybe took the 10-minute breather before we started that tough conversation. I wonder what it would look like if we decided to hear one person's side, not seek to respond to it, but seek to courageously listen, where our heart leans into the discomfort without having to be reactionary. When somebody, in some cases, as I might speak kind of in general around ethical culture, the idea of having youth is exciting, but also wild. And there's oftentimes a little tug, a little tension of intergenerational relationships. I'm sure we don't have that at Riverdale. Everybody gets along here. But if we really look at it, we are often trying to be seen. Being seen in courageous space changes what is seen as wild. We change as a result of how people care for us, how they lean in with us, how they walk alongside us, how they share in discomfort with us. I remember, if I may offer this personal reflection, being at Union, and I remember when the first movement for Black Lives Matter started happening. There was such a fervency and a fire that was just moving across, and folks were absolutely in a craze about justice. Racial justice had finally hit a new pinnacle, and everyone had to respond. Everyone. Not just me as a person of color, but even my white counterparts, even those of various different ethnic backgrounds. And when you decided to yell and chant, the craze of being able to share in that energy, it was interesting to think There was a moment in me that was uncertain and trying to figure out if I was to chant Black Lives Matter, did it mean that because I was pro-Black that I was anti-white? Let's sit with that. Because I decided to take a pro-Black stance, was I anti-white? Why does that exist in that moment? It exists because it is wild to take a stance like that. And I knew coming up in the era, everybody had to get along. You wanted everyone to find, but there was suffering. And the arguments were on the news, whether you were watching Fox or whether you were watching something, it was like, this race thing is getting out of control because it's wild. And then what do we say? We say, well, I have nothing to do with it. It's not my fault. Some folk wanted to wash their hands of it and not be bothered. Some folks said, that's not, we did that work in the civil rights. We don't need to be bothered. It was too wild. But if we were listening, when I began to listen, when I began to share, when I actually took in the statistics to learn, do you know that learning is an act of loving? I took the time to learn, to inform my own self of things that I had been deprived from. I took the opportunity to engage what others were saying was wild, difficult, challenging, uncomfortable, unwanted, unnecessary. I decided to learn. I decided to love. I decided to get logistics. And I decided to land with my fellow peers in protest. And while they were seen as wild things, I realized that they weren't wild at all. They were courageous. They just needed some love. They just needed to be seen. They just needed someone to learn of them and take upon themselves the story of their humanity. And I had to take on that story, even if some of those parts, because not all of us are the same. I'm sure you have realized that. But I had to take on parts of the narrative in order to walk with those who were wild things. I didn't want to be Max, making everybody go to sleep without nourishment. I like being nourished. I know you like being nourished, my Zoom community. I know we like being nourished here. How do we care enough that this becomes courageous space? I'll list them again. First, you got to have love. Figure it out what it looks like. It's not just a compassion thing. We can talk about that later on my next platform. I can promise you that. We can spend a whole day on James Baldwin. But love is key. Learning is the other. Being informed with the logistics is the other. And landing together is the last, right? When we sit with those four things, we are able to transform the wildness that is ethical culture into a radical space that is courageous. It's wild to be humanist. How dare you not believe in anything I believe in? It's wild to be an ethical culturist. It's wild to be an agnostic. It's wild. But I invite you in this space to be nourished so that you can be in courageous space. I leave you with these closing words. I was debating to use them, but they're on my heart today. Let's use some fingerprint here. I like honoring my ancestors, so I read it like this. In contemplating our future, we must weigh our decisions very carefully. It is very easy for each of us to base our opinions on what is important to our need at the moment in this time. While it is challenging to imagine a future which is different from what we are used to, while it is challenging to imagine a future which is different, which is wild than what we are used to, it is imperative that we do just that. Change is uncomfortable. The humanist values we share must compel us to trust each other, to love each other, to learn of each other, to land with each other, to be informed logistically by one another, to shape a collective vision that benefits us all. I believe at this point in our evolution with this movement, we must choose between the status quo, which leads us to stagnation, or to a dynamic and innovative future filled with a robust promise. That is from the desk in the privacy of L. Miller, a dear colleague of mine. I read that at his desk. That was a paper he wrote when he wanted to be a leader. And to read that and to actually see it was quite moving. I believe he was writing about folk like myself and others who dare to love ourselves courageously when we look wild. I invite you to love yourself, and I invite this community to continue to love each other, even as wild as we may seem, so that we can be courageous together. Thank you.